So a lot of people are talking about 2% wealth taxes these days. And we need to be having this conversation, but seriously, we're talking 2%? Like, we left the stable door open about 45 years ago and the horse has well and truly bolted. So the super rich have inordinately more than they did, even just 25 years ago. Like the scale of the extraction of income from society generally to the very, very top over the past sort of 40, 30, 25 years has been monumental. I think one study estimated that it's about 90 trillion shift in wealth from the middle class largely and the working class to the very rich. That's just in America. So the problem we have is now structural. It's not just a case of our governments are struggling to fund, their current spending in the year because incomes have sort of decreased in real terms and the wealthy are just sort of siphoning it off. It's not just a question of bridging that gap. The problem we have is structural. There is deep dysfunction in the entire market, and this is why house prices make no sense for young people. They're completely decoupled from incomes in society. And people, I think, superficially you come to, you're like, well, demand and supply, they're just not building enough. And that's actually a very small part of it. There's a study done recently that even if they built, 1 million more, the price would only fall about 2% because the problem isn't actually a sort of physical demand and supply. The problem is a small group of people have vast amounts of capital and they're just looking for places to plug it, and they have so much more they can outspend almost all of the rest of society, have that as an asset, and then get us paying rent to them for the rest of our lives, which works for them and doesn't work for us and is completely dysfunctional as a society. But this is, I think, the most visible dysfunction of a society where vast, unfathomable wealth has pooled, not kind of broadly spread in society, but in, the hands of a tiny, tiny segment. So if we want to shift back to something more democratic and more sane, maybe something that our parents remember in the 70s, 80s, maybe 90s, we need to get money cycling again amongst us, amongst society. That's how you get growth. That's how you get a healthy society where it's easy to start and sell things because people have disposable income and you've got the money cycling, rather than growing share just being siphoned by, a tiny handful and then plugged into assets to earn more and more and more, as growth of the economy splutters to a halt and everyone else is screwed. So sure, part of this is going to be a big wealth tax, but 2% is trying to maintain the system we have and the incentives we have. And the incentives we have at the moment, where the rich and their motivation to extract more and more, this is what has got us into this problem of spluttering growth and sky high land and homes and asset prices, and also declining real living standards. So what we're going to have to do, or part of what we're going to have to do, if we want to sort of fix the economy for society rather than for the rich, would be a sizable wealth tax. Now the problem is, obviously you do have incentives, so you'd need this to be one-off and it would need to be a surprise. And you probably don't want to leave too many billionaires where they can reorganize and completely clamp down and ensure this never ever happens again and they have power in perpetuity. So you probably want it to be a one and done, and we're back to the inequality curve that is reasonable with the amount of power we think is reasonable for one individual, one family to hold. And of course this sounds radical, but the radical thing is that we're letting, millions billions of people suffer and toil in poverty, and in the rich world, people are struggling to feed themselves and heat their homes, and the young have no real hope unless they're in maybe the top 3%, and have married someone else in the top 3%, and their parents have money, and then they can maybe buy a home. That's sort of nice. The real kind of idiocy is that we tolerate this system at all. But yeah, at the moment, this sort of sounds radical, but I think we need to start talking about it to sort of gradually start opening that Overton window of, this is a shit show. What are the solutions? Well, this is a shit show. This is in an extreme degree. So we're going to need radical solutions to resolve it. Okay. So what are some other parts of this kind of equation to radically fix the economy? So one is a sort of wealth tax, but you can approach it from the level of the hyper wealthy, or you can approach it from the, national assets. So businesses based in the UK, but also subsidiaries or, parts of businesses like Amazon that are operating in Ireland, but are actually generating and extracting money and profit from the UK. So you need when you're kind of shifting from this hyper-capitalist system, you need some demarcation around British assets, and you would look for the very largest firms, monopolies and oligopolies, for those to move into sort of at least 50% sort of nationalised ownership, and then for sort of maybe sort of medium, smaller big firms, that doesn't really make sense, you'd maybe be looking at a sort of 30% share for society, local government and the state. And then you'd want this growing share for employees to have a kind of stake in the actual sort of capital and decisions that the firms are making. So sort of shifting to something like the German model, which is a sort of stakeholder kind of decision-making model, but going further to ensure that large businesses are not being organised solely in the interest of the rich to extract as much as possible, but there's a sort of balanced input from society, kind of nationally, locally, local employees and investors. That's a lot.